Something happened to me recently, and I just wanted to take the time to explore it because I thought that it would be helpful for a lot of other people. Have you ever found yourself in a situation with someone where you felt like you needed to communicate how you were feeling, but the way you communicated it wasn't really paralleled to the situation? Maybe you were actually angry and you needed to communicate the anger, right? But you didn't actually communicate the anger. And what you did instead would have ended up being a passive aggressive approach because instead you just dismissed it all and you just allowed all that stuff to be brushed under the carpet, which would then turn into a future event where you would just not bring it up at all. But then something else would happen and it would come up later on in the future event. So something happened in my life recently where I realized that my response to a situation was actually not congruent to the way that I was feeling. And it was challenging for me to correct myself because I thought that maybe correcting myself would lead to an outcome that I actually didn't want. This can be common for a lot of people that end up being afraid of losing people or being afraid of, being abandoned. And there are abandonment wounds linked to this kind of stuff, right? The very core root of this is the abandonment wound. It's what if they don't like my emotional response to the situation? What if they don't like the way that I'm approaching this? There's a bunch of what ifs, which leads a lot of people to be paralyzed and not follow through with that emotional response to the situation. By the way, I apologize if you can hear any background noise. There are a lot of people in other rooms around me. Anyway, getting back to it, yeah, this experience that I had recently was fascinating because it helped me to understand that it's important to sit in the tension of uncomfortable conversations, of communicating your emotions. The more you do it, the better you get at it, and the better you get at respecting yourself. And the more you respect yourself, the more other people will actually respect you. Nobody's going to respect you if you don't respect yourself. Nobody's going to be present with your emotions if you refuse yourself to be present with them. Whatever it is that you experience in here, you're going to experience out there, and that's the reality of it. And this is a very challenging lesson for a lot of people, but it's very important to understand that the more you do it, the more you sit inside of that tension of being like, wait a second, that's actually not congruent to what it was that I felt. That's not congruent to what it was that I needed to meet for myself. So much of this has to do with us meeting our inner child needs, being respected, being seen, expressing our emotions and having that be understood, and not having people run away just because you express your emotions, just because you express your anger. And by the way, let me say this as well: we risk people leaving when we actually communicate what it is that we're feeling. But the most important thing is that we're actually meeting our own needs. It's important to understand that. The respect out there comes from when we respect ourselves in here, when we meet our own needs, when we actually are congruent with what we're feeling. When instead of being like, oh, it's okay, whatever, no, I'm fucking pissed. And it's important to be congruent with that. It's important to be present with that. It's important to be aware of that. It's important to communicate that. People that are healthy can deal with anger. People that are unhealthy run away from it. This is also another really good way to understand who can actually be present with you, because it will completely transform the entire dynamic and show you who is actually capable of being present with your emotions. And it's not that it's their shit. It's just that you're being honest, because passive aggressiveness is a real thing. When you are passive, when you're like, oh, it's okay, and you're just saying it's okay because you're afraid that somebody's going to leave, it fucks up the entire situation even more. It's important to be congruent with what it is that you're feeling, and with that, communicate that to the other person. Because the more you do that, the more you're present with yourself, the more you allow other people to actually be present with what you're feeling. And have you ever found that down the line somebody actually communicates to you that they would have preferred you to be present with them and be honest with what you were feeling? This is transformative. This is healing. This is the power of actually doing the opposite of what you previously did. This can take you to lengths that so many other things will never take you. And sitting inside of that tension, sitting with all of the emotions, sitting with the guilt, the obligation, the shame, whatever emotions arise that you previously neglected or tried to avoid, there is so much power in that. There's so much healing power. It's so transformative, it's productive. You know that it feels right because it feels right. And that's the power of it. Isn't that fascinating? When you actually dive into what it is that you're feeling and communicate that, there's a shift in energy inside of you. There's a shift in frequency. You transform. You sit into yourself. You sit into your self respect, and you're like, and it really just takes everything in a whole different direction.